Sophia huddled in the corner of the abandoned market, counting the few coins she'd managed to collect that morning. Not enough for milk, barely enough for bread. She glanced at her watch, a cheap plastic thing with a crack across its face, and realized she needed to get back to Leo and the babies. The streets of Sao Paulo showed no mercy to a 26-year-old woman with 3 newborns and a 10-year-old brother to care for. 2 months ago, she'd had a job at a local coffee shop, a small apartment, and their mother to help with the children. Then came the layoffs, followed by the accident that took their mother, and finally the eviction notice that had sent them spiraling into homelessness. Just $5 more, she whispered to herself, rubbing her eyes with grimy hands. $5 more, and she could buy formula for the babies. When she returned to their makeshift shelter, Leo was sitting cross-legged on a piece of cloth she'd found in a dumpster, one baby cradled in his small arms while the other 2 slept beside him. His face brightened when he saw her, though the shadows under his eyes betrayed his exhaustion. Did they cry a lot? Sophia asked, kneeling beside him. Leo shook his head. Only Maria. I sang to her like you showed me. Sophia kissed his forehead, taking Maria from his arms. You're the best little man in the world, you know that. Leo shrugged, but she could see the pride in his eyes. It broke her heart that at 10 years old, he'd become a caretaker, forced to grow up overnight. She tried the shelters, but they separated families, and Sophia had promised their mother they would stay together, no matter what. I got some bread, she said, pulling a half loaf from her bag. And a little cheese. Eat slowly. As Leo ate, Sophia checked on the triplets, Maria, Anna, and Luisa, born 6 weeks ago to a father who had disappeared once he learned Sophia was pregnant. The girls were getting thinner, their faces pinched with hunger even in sleep. She'd given birth in a public hospital, used the last of their savings to stay in a motel for the first month, and then the money had run out. Any luck with jobs? Leo asked, his mouth full of bread. Sophia hesitated. She'd been turned away from 3 places today. Without an address or phone, employers wouldn't even consider her. Not yet, but tomorrow for sure. Every day she left Leo with the babies, her stomach twisted with guilt. A 10-year-old shouldn't have to do this. She tried taking the babies with her, but carrying 3 infants while looking for work was impossible. She tried going to social services, but the fear of being separated kept her away. That night, as they huddled together under a thin blanket, rain pattering on the market's corrugated roof, Sophia whispered promises to her little family that she wasn't sure she could keep. Tomorrow would be better. Tomorrow she would find work. Tomorrow they wouldn't be hungry. She didn't notice the black car with tinted windows parked across the street, or the man inside who had been watching them for days. The next morning, Sophia woke before dawn. She fed the babies what little formula remained, cleaned them with wet wipes she'd begged from a convenience store, and showed Leo one more time how to hold them properly. If they get really hungry and I'm not back, use the dropper and give them sugar water, she instructed, demonstrating the mixture. Just a little, okay? And stay in the shadow of the building. Don't let anyone see you. Leo nodded solemnly, circles under his eyes making him look far older than his years. We'll be okay, Sophia. I promise. She pressed her forehead against his. I'll be back before sunset. I love you. As Sophia walked away, forcing herself not to look back, she wiped tears from her face. Each step felt like betrayal. A sister shouldn't leave her brother alone like this. A mother shouldn't leave her babies. But a family couldn't survive on air and promises. She tried everything, restaurants, shops, cleaning houses, but no one wanted to hire a woman who looked like she lived on the streets, because she did. Today she would try the industrial district, where perhaps appearance wouldn't matter as much as willing hands. What Sophia didn't know was that while she searched desperately for work, someone had already found them. The man in the car had seen what no one else had bothered to notice. A boy barely out of childhood himself, caring for 3 infant girls with a gentleness that shouldn't exist in such harsh circumstances. And he'd made a decision that would change their lives forever. Mateo Vasconcelos tapped his fingers against the leather armrest of his Mercedes, watching the street corner through tinted windows. His driver, Carlos, sat silently in the front, used to his employer's increasingly peculiar behavior over the past week. Same time tomorrow, Mateo said, finally signaling they could leave. At 45, Mateo had everything money could buy and nothing that truly mattered. The past decade had hollowed him out, beginning with the death of his wife Elena and their unborn daughter during childbirth. The legal battle with his brother over their family company had only been the final blow, leaving him wealthy beyond measure, but completely alone. He hadn't meant to find them. A traffic jam had forced Carlos to detour through this neighborhood, far from the gleaming high-rises where Mateo conducted business. That's when he'd spotted the boy, thin, with careful movements, tending to what Mateo initially thought was a bundle of laundry. The realization that they were babies had stopped him cold. "Pull over," he'd ordered that first day, watching in disbelief as the child, who couldn't be older than 10, cradled an infant while two others lay beside him on a makeshift blanket. For 5 days now, Mateo had returned, parking at a distance, watching. He told himself he was concerned for the children's welfare, that he should call social services. But something held him back. The way the boy spoke softly to the babies, the careful way he supported their heads, the system he'd developed for feeding them one at a time from a single bottle. It wasn't neglect he was witnessing, but love in impossible circumstances. Back at his penthouse that evening, Mateo poured himself a whiskey and stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Somewhere down there, 4 children were spending another night with only a thin piece of cloth between them and the concrete. "Sir," his housekeeper, Mrs. Patel, stood at the door. "Your dinner is ready." Mateo hadn't touched his food in days. "Pack it up and prepare some formula, diapers, blankets, whatever babies need." Mrs. Patel raised an eyebrow but asked no questions. She'd worked for him long enough to know when he was in one of his moods. The next morning, Mateo woke before dawn, something he hadn't done since Elena died. He collected the supplies Mrs. Patel had gathered and instructed Carlos to drive him back to the abandoned market. They arrived just in time to see a young woman walking away from the market, her shoulders hunched, wiping at her face. The boy remained where Mateo had seen him all week, now with 3 small bundles beside him. "Wait here," Mateo told Carlos, grabbing the bag of supplies. As he approached, the boy looked up, instantly alert. His hand moved protectively over the babies. "It's okay," Mateo said, stopping a few feet away. "I brought some things for them." He set the bag down and stepped back, giving the child space. The boy eyed him suspiciously. "My sister will be back soon." "I'm sure she will," Mateo said, keeping his voice gentle. "I'm Mateo. What's your name?" "Leo." The boy's voice was small but steady. "And them?" Mateo gestured to the babies. Leo relaxed slightly. "Maria, Anna, and Luisa. They're triplets. That means they were born at the same time." "I know what triplets are," Mateo said, smiling despite himself. "May I?" He gestured to the space beside Leo. After a moment's hesitation, Leo nodded. Mateo sat down, careful to keep some distance between them. He opened the bag, showing Leo the formula, diapers, and blankets. "Your sister? She's their mother?" Leo nodded. "Sophia. She's looking for a job." He lowered his voice. "It's hard because we don't have a phone or address." Mateo's chest tightened. "How old are you, Leo?" 10. "But I'm good with the babies. Sophia taught me everything." One of the infants began to fuss, tiny fists waving in the air. Without thinking, Mateo reached out. Leo hesitated, then carefully transferred the baby into Mateo's arms. "That's Maria," Leo said. "She cries the most." Mateo looked down at the tiny face, and his world tilted on its axis. The baby opened her eyes, hazel green, just like Elena's. It was impossible, a coincidence, and yet he couldn't look away. "She has pretty eyes," Leo said proudly, as if he'd had something to do with it. "Yes," Mateo managed, his throat suddenly tight. "She does." For the next hour, Mateo sat with Leo, helping him feed the babies with the new formula. He learned that their mother had died 2 months ago, that Sophia had lost her job, that they'd been evicted from their apartment. Leo told him all this without self-pity, as if reciting facts from a textbook. "Why are you helping us?" Leo asked finally, his young face serious. Mateo had been asking himself the same question. Was it pity? Charity? Or something about these children that had pierced the armor he'd built around himself after Elena died? "Sometimes people just need a little help," he said finally. "No reason." Leo studied him for a moment, then nodded as if this made perfect sense. They heard footsteps, and Leo's face brightened. "That's Sophia." Mateo turned to see the young woman from earlier approaching, her expression shifting from exhaustion to alarm when she spotted him sitting with her brother and the babies. As she came closer, Mateo felt a jolt of recognition. The woman's face was thinner, her hair longer, but he knew her. Years ago, she had worked briefly as an intern at his company, bright, ambitious, with a quiet determination that had impressed him. She stopped a few feet away, her body tense, ready to grab the children and run if necessary. "Sophia," Mateo said, standing slowly. "You probably don't remember me, but Mr. Vasconcelos," she interrupted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I remember." Sophia's mind raced as she stared at Mateo Vasconcelos, one of the wealthiest men in Sao Paulo, sitting on the ground next to her brother, holding her baby. She hadn't recognized him from a distance, had only seen the expensive shoes and tailored suit, and felt fear spike through her chest. "What are you doing here?" she asked, stepping closer to Leo, who looked confused by the tension. "He brought formula and diapers," Leo said quickly, "and he knows how to hold babies. He helped me feed them." Sophia's eyes darted to the bag beside Mateo, then back to his face. She'd interned at his company for 6 months during college, before their mother got sick and she'd had to drop out. He had been her boss's boss, a distant figure who occasionally nodded to the interns in the hallway. He probably didn't even remember her beyond a vague recognition. "Thank you for the supplies," she said stiffly, "but we don't need charity." Mateo stood, carefully handing Maria back to Leo. "It's not charity, Sophia. It's—" He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "I saw your brother here, with the babies. I was concerned." "We're fine," she said automatically, though the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. They were not fine. They were one bad day away from complete disaster. But pride was the only thing she had left. "Did you find work?" Leo asked, his voice hopeful. Sophia shook her head, unable to meet his eyes. Another day of rejection, of doors closing before she could even make her case. "I might be able to help with that," Mateo said. When Sophia looked at him sharply, he added, "My housekeeper mentioned needing an assistant. Nothing glamorous. Cleaning, some cooking, helping with errands." Sophia narrowed her eyes. "Why would you do that?" Mateo's gaze drifted to the babies, and something flickered across his face that Sophia couldn't read. "Because everyone deserves a chance. You were a good intern, from what I remember. Diligent. Organized." The compliment caught her off guard. She'd assumed he hadn't noticed her at all. "The position includes accommodation," he continued. "A small apartment above the garage at my property. It would be temporary, just until you find something better." Sophia's heart hammered in her chest. A job, a roof, safety for her babies and Leo. It seemed too good to be true, which meant it probably was. "What's the catch?" she asked bluntly. "No catch. Mrs. Patel is getting older and needs help. I need someone reliable." He met her eyes directly. "If it makes you feel better, consider it a business arrangement. You work, you get paid, you have a place to stay. No charity involved." Sophia glanced at Leo, who was watching her with wide, hopeful eyes while cradling Maria. Anna and Luisa slept peacefully beside him, wrapped in the new blankets Mateo had brought. They couldn't stay here. Winter was coming, and the babies were already too thin. "When would I start?" she asked finally. "Today, if you want. My driver can take us now." Sophia hesitated. Everything in her screamed that this was too fast, too convenient. Men like Mateo Vasconcelos didn't just offer jobs and housing to homeless single mothers they barely remembered. "I need to think about it," she said. Mateo nodded, pulling a business card from his pocket. "Take your time. Call this number when you decide." He glanced at the darkening sky. "Though I should warn you, there's rain in the forecast tonight." As if on cue, a low rumble of thunder sounded in the distance. Sophia looked at her babies, at Leo's tired face, at the meager possessions they had managed to keep. One more night in the rain could make the girls sick. Leo was already developing a cough. "We'll come," she said quietly. "But I want to be clear, this is a job. I'll work hard, but I won't accept anything beyond what I earn." Mateo inclined his head. Understood. They gathered their few belongings, clothes, a photo of their mother, the small stuffed bear Leo had carried since childhood. Carlos, Mateo's driver, helped them into the car, his face professionally blank despite the unusual situation. As they drove through the city, Sophia kept the babies close, while Leo pressed his face to the window, watching the buildings grow larger and more elegant. She felt a strange mix of relief and suspicion. Why had Mateo been watching them? Why was he helping now? The car turned into a gated driveway. winding up to a large house set back among carefully manicured gardens. Not the main house, Sophia realized with relief, but a guest house on the property, large by her standards, but modest compared to what she imagined Mateo's actual home must be. "Mrs. Patel will show you around," Mateo said as Carlos parked. "Get settled, get some rest. You can start tomorrow." Sophia nodded, unable to find words as they were led into a clean, furnished apartment with 2 bedrooms, a bathroom with hot water, and a kitchen stocked with food. Mrs. Patel, a gray-haired woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner, showed Sophia where everything was, explained her duties, and helped set up makeshift cribs for the babies. That night, after Leo and the triplets were asleep in real beds for the first time in weeks, Sophia stood by the window, watching rain lash against the glass. They were safe, dry-fed. It should have felt like a miracle. Instead, she felt uneasy. She hadn't missed the way Mateo had looked at Maria, with something like recognition or shock. There was more to this sudden generosity than a vague memory of her as an intern. From the guest house window, she could see lights on in the main house. Mateo was there, probably in some luxurious study with expensive whiskey, thinking about his good deed for the day. Sophia turned away from the window. Whatever his reasons, she would make this work. She would be the best housekeeper assistant he'd ever seen. She would save money, find a better job, get her own place. This was temporary, a stepping stone, not a solution. What she didn't know was that at that very moment, Mateo was sitting in his study, a glass of untouched whiskey in his hand, staring at an old photograph of his late wife Elena, a wife whose hazel green eyes were identical to baby Maria's. The first week at the guest house passed in a blur of exhaustion and adjustment. Sophia woke at dawn each day, fed the babies, then reported to Mrs. Patel for her duties. The work wasn't difficult: cleaning, organizing, helping prepare meals, but doing it while caring for 3 infants left her constantly tired. Leo had settled in more easily. After his initial wariness, he'd grown comfortable in their new surroundings. Mrs. Patel had taken a shine to him, slipping him extra desserts and teaching him simple cooking techniques. Sophia had enrolled him in the local school, and though he'd protested at first, not wanting to leave the babies, he'd quickly rediscovered the joy of being around other children. Sophia saw little of Mateo during those first days. He appeared occasionally, nodding politely before disappearing into his home office or leaving in his car for business meetings. This suited her fine. The less she saw of him, the easier it was to pretend this was simply a job, not an act of charity she still didn't fully understand. On the 8th day, Sophia was folding laundry in the main house when she heard voices from Mateo's study. The door was ajar, and though she tried not to listen, a familiar name caught her attention. "Background check on Sophia Almeida," as requested, a man was saying. Nothing concerning in her history. Parents died of illness 3 years apart. Father first, then mother 2 months ago. Car accident. She dropped out of university to care for her younger brother. No criminal record, no debts beyond the usual student loans. The father of her children isn't in the picture. Boyfriend who left when she told him she was pregnant. Sophia froze, the shirt in her hands half folded. He was investigating her. Anger flared, hot and sudden. She had half a mind to burst into the room and demand an explanation, but the man continued speaking. "The triplets are confirmed as hers. Hospital records show she gave birth 6 weeks ago at Santa Maria Public Hospital. Normal delivery, though the babies were slightly premature. All healthy despite that. And there's nothing else?" Mateo's voice now. "Nothing unusual about her past or the children? Nothing I could find, sir. She seems to be exactly what she appears, a young woman who's had a run of bad luck." Sophia backed away from the door, her heart pounding. Why was Mateo so interested in her background? In her babies? The suspicion that had nagged at her since their first meeting grew stronger. There was something he wasn't telling her. That evening, after the babies were asleep and Leo was reading one of the books Mrs. Patel had given him, Sophia heard a knock at the guest house door. Mateo stood there, looking slightly uncomfortable. "May I come in?" he asked. Sophia hesitated, then stepped aside. He entered, glancing around the small living room where signs of their presence had already accumulated. A baby blanket draped over the couch, Leo's school papers on the coffee table, a half-empty bottle of formula on the counter. "I wanted to see how you're settling in," Mateo said. "Mrs. Patel speaks highly of your work." "We're fine." Sophia said, the words clipped. The job is fine. Thank you. Matteo nodded, clearly sensing her coolness. Is there anything you need? For the children? Or for Leo? Sophia crossed her arms. Why are you really here, Mr. Vasconcelos? And why did you have someone investigate my background? To his credit, Matteo didn't deny it or look surprised that she knew. I apologize for that. It was a precaution. I needed to be sure about who I was bringing onto my property around my staff. And are you satisfied that I'm not a criminal? That's not what I meant. He ran a hand through his hair, a surprisingly human gesture from someone who usually seemed so controlled. I should have been upfront with you. About what? Matteo's gaze drifted to the nursery door. May I see the babies? The request caught Sophia off guard. They're sleeping. I won't wake them. Please. Something in his voice, a note of what sounded almost like desperation, made Sophia nod reluctantly. She led him to the small second bedroom they'd converted into a nursery, where 3 cribs held her sleeping daughters. Matteo stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable as he looked at the infants. His gaze lingered on Maria, whose tiny face was turned toward the door, her dark lashes stark against her cheeks. Your daughter, he said quietly. Maria. She reminds me of someone. Who? Sophia asked, though she was beginning to suspect the answer. My wife. Matteo turned to her, his composure finally cracking. She died 11 years ago, during childbirth. Our daughter too. Sophia's anger faltered. I'm sorry for your loss, but I don't understand what that has to do with us. Neither do I exactly. Matteo looked back at Maria. But when I saw your daughter's eyes, it was like seeing Elena again. The same color, hazel green, almost golden in certain lights. It's unsettling. It's a coincidence, Sophia said firmly. Nothing more. Of course. Matteo stepped back from the doorway. I just wanted you to understand why I might have seemed overly interested in your family. It stirred up memories. Sophia studied him, seeing for the first time the grief that seemed to hover around him like a shadow. She had assumed his reserved manner was coldness or superiority. Now she wondered if it was simply pain, calcified over years into something hard and protective. I appreciate your honesty, she said finally. But I need to be clear about something. We're here because you offered me a job when I desperately needed one. I'm grateful for that. But my daughters aren't replacements for the one you lost. They're their own people, with their own futures. I know that, Matteo said quickly. I never meant to imply. I just need to be sure we understand each other. He nodded. We do. He moved toward the door, then paused. Sophia, I know you value your independence. But if you'll allow it, I'd like to help Leo with his education. There's a good private school nearby. He's a bright boy. He deserves a chance. Sophia wanted to refuse immediately. It was too much, too personal. But she thought of Leo, how quickly he'd taken to learning again, how he deserved more than she could give him right now. I'll think about it, she said. After Matteo left, Sophia checked on the babies one more time, her fingers brushing Maria's soft cheek. Hazel green eyes, like Matteo's dead wife. A bizarre coincidence, nothing more. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling that they were all being pulled towards something they didn't understand yet. What Sophia couldn't know, was that Matteo had already set events in motion that would uncover a truth more extraordinary than either of them could imagine. That night, he made a call to the fertility clinic where Elena had undergone IVF treatment 11 years ago. He needed to know if they still had records of their egg donor. 2 months passed, settling into a rhythm that felt almost normal. Leo attended the private school Matteo had suggested, thriving in the structured environment and making friends for the first time since they'd lost their home. Sophia continued working for Mrs. Patel, but had gradually taken on additional responsibilities, including helping organize events for Matteo's business associates. The babies grew stronger, their faces filling out, their personalities emerging. Maria remained the most vocal, Anna the most observant, and Luisa the calmest. Sophia watched them develop with a fierce love that sometimes overwhelmed her. They were her miracle, her reason to keep pushing forward. Matteo remained a puzzling presence. After their conversation about his wife, he'd kept a respectful distance, but Sophia often caught him watching the children with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. Not quite sadness, not quite hope, something in between. One evening, as Sophia was sorting through some of Matteo's correspondence at his request, she came across a letter from a fertility clinic. Though she knew she shouldn't read it, Something compelled her to skim the contents. It was a response to Mateo's inquiry about egg donor records from 11 years ago, explaining that while they maintained records, they couldn't release identifying information without legal authorization. Sophia's hands trembled as she set the letter down. A suspicion began forming in her mind, one so strange she almost dismissed it immediately. But once the thought took hold, she couldn't shake it. During her second year of university, desperate for money to pay rent and her mother's medical bills, Sophia had donated eggs to a fertility clinic. The compensation had been enough to keep them afloat for several months. She'd never thought about it again, had never considered that those eggs might have become children somewhere. Children with her eyes, her bone structure, her DNA. Children like Maria, whose hazel green eyes had so startled Mateo. It was impossible. The coincidence would be too vast, too unlikely. And yet, Sophia waited until the next day, when she knew Mateo would be working in his study. She knocked on the door, her heart hammering. "Come in," he called. Sophia entered, closing the door behind her. "I need to ask you something." Mateo set aside his laptop, giving her his full attention. He'd been different lately, less formal, more present. He'd started joining them for occasional meals, had taken Leo to a football match last weekend. Small steps towards something neither of them had named. "What clinic did your wife use for her IVF treatment?" Sophia asked without preamble. Mateo stilled, his expression sharpening. "Why do you want to know that?" "Please just tell me." "Centro de Fertilidad Nacional," he said after a moment. "Downtown, near the old cathedral." Sophia's breath caught. The same clinic where she'd donated eggs. "When exactly was your wife treated there?" "Sophia, what is this about?" "When?" "August through October, 11 years ago." Mateo stood, moving around his desk to face her. "Why are you asking these questions?" Sophia sank into a chair, suddenly dizzy. "Because I donated eggs at that same clinic, at that same time. I was 19, in my second year at university. I needed money for my mother's medical treatments, for rent." Mateo stared at her, the color draining from his face. "That's not possible, isn't it?" Sophia met his gaze. "Your wife had hazel green eyes. So does Maria. So do I, though mine are darker. I was donor number 7294. Do you know your wife's donor number?" Mateo didn't answer immediately. He walked to a cabinet, unlocked it, and pulled out a folder. His hands weren't entirely steady as he flipped through the pages. 7294, he finally said, his voice barely audible. The room seemed to tilt around Sophia. She gripped the arms of the chair, anchoring herself. "It doesn't make sense," she whispered. "If your wife was pregnant with my donated egg and lost the baby, then how could Maria be that same child?" Mateo finished for her. "She can't be, biologically, but genetically. She could be my biological daughter and carry the same genes as the baby your wife carried," Sophia said slowly. "A genetic sister, essentially." They sat in stunned silence, the implications washing over them. "We need to be sure," Mateo finally said. "A DNA test." Sophia nodded. The idea should have frightened her, that this man, this virtual stranger, might have some claim to her child. Instead, she felt an odd sense of clarity, as if puzzle pieces were finally shifting into place. A week later, they had their answer. The DNA test confirmed what they had already guessed. Sophia was genetically related to the baby Mateo's wife had been carrying. Maria, Anna, and Luisa shared the same genetic makeup, but Maria, by some twist of fate or chance, had inherited more of Sophia's visible traits, including the distinctive eyes that had caught Mateo's attention that first day. "What does this mean?" Sophia asked as they sat in his study, the test results on the desk between them. "For us, for the children?" Mateo looked as lost as she felt. "I don't know. Legally, it changes nothing. They're your daughters. But you feel connected to them. To Maria especially." "Yes." He ran a hand over his face. "I've spent 11 years mourning a child I never got to know. And now, here she is, not the same child, but carrying the same genetic blueprint. It's miraculous and strange and frightening." Sophia finished for him. "Is it frightening for you?" Sophia considered the question. "At first, yes. I thought you might try to claim some kind of rights to my daughter. I would never do that. I know that now." And she did. Over these months, she'd watched Mateo with her children, with Leo. He was never intrusive, never possessive, only gentle, attentive, respectful of boundaries. But it does complicate things. Mateo leaned forward, his expression earnest. It doesn't have to. We can define this however makes sense for you, for the children. I would just like to be part of their lives, in whatever way you're comfortable with. Sophia studied him. The guarded, distant man she'd first met had gradually revealed himself to be thoughtful, kind, wounded but not broken. She'd begun to see glimpses of who he must have been before loss hardened him. Someone with a quiet humor, a gentle patience, a capacity for joy he'd forgotten he possessed. They need stability, she said finally. So does Leo. We've all had enough upheaval. I understand. But, she continued, if you're proposing a more permanent arrangement, not just as our employer, but as part of our lives, then we need to build something real. Not based on coincidence or genetic quirks or your memories of someone else. Based on who we actually are right now. Mateo nodded slowly. I'd like that. To start fresh, with clear eyes. No ghosts between us. Sophia felt something loosen in her chest. A tension she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. Then we take it slow, one day at a time. See where it leads. That night, as Sophia tucked her daughters into their cribs, she paused at Maria's, studying the tiny face that had set this whole unlikely chain of events in motion. Had some part of her always known? Had she sensed, somehow, that this child carried a connection to a past she'd almost forgotten? Your eyes have caused quite a stir, little one, she whispered, stroking Maria's cheek. The baby yawned, blinking up at her with those remarkable hazel green eyes before drifting off to sleep. From the doorway, Mateo watched silently, his expression no longer haunted but wondering. Whatever lay ahead, whatever shape this unusual family might take, they had found each other against impossible odds. And perhaps that was enough of a miracle for now. The triplets' first birthday arrived on a warm spring day. Sophia woke early, a mixture of pride and disbelief filling her as she realized her daughters had survived their precarious beginning and thrived. She found Mateo already in the kitchen of the main house, awkwardly attempting to frost 3 small cakes. I thought I'd help, he said, looking slightly embarrassed at the uneven results of his efforts. Mrs. Patel gave me instructions, but I'm clearly not gifted in this area. Sophia smiled, taking in the scene. The wealthy businessman who once seemed so unapproachable, now with frosting on his sleeve and a determined expression as he tried to create something special for her children. For their children, in a way neither of them had anticipated. It's perfect, she said, meaning it. The past 6 months had changed them all. Leo had blossomed at his new school, his natural intelligence finding outlets in science and mathematics. The babies had grown from fragile newborns into curious, babbling 1-year-olds who crawled everywhere and pulled themselves up on furniture. Sophia had moved from housekeeper to manager of Mateo's newly established foundation for single mothers, using her experience to shape programs that provided what women actually needed, not just handouts, but pathways to independence. And Mateo had slowly thawed, the grief that had defined him for so long gradually making room for something new. He still had quiet days, moments when Sophia would find him lost in thought, perhaps remembering Elena. But those days grew less frequent as he became more deeply involved in their daily lives. They had taken things slowly, as Sophia had insisted. Mateo remained in the main house while Sophia and the children stayed in the guest house, maintaining the boundaries that allowed their unusual relationship to develop without pressure. He joined them for dinners, weekend outings, doctor's appointments, becoming a steady presence rather than an outsider looking in. The birthday party was small, just the 5 of them, Mrs. Patel, and a few friends Leo had made at school. Sophia watched as Mateo helped Maria take wobbly steps across the garden, his hands supporting her tiny ones, his face alight with a joy she would have thought impossible when they first met. Later, after the other guests had left and the babies were napping, exhausted from the excitement, Sophia and Mateo sat on the patio with coffee. I've been thinking, Mateo said, breaking a comfortable silence. About the foundation. Sophia nodded. The foundation had become her passion, a way to help women who were in the same desperate situation she had once faced. What about it? I'd like to expand it. Open a residential center where mothers can stay with their children while they get back on their feet. Job training, childcare, healthcare, everything in one place. That would be incredible, Sophia said, already envisioning how it could work. But it would take significant resources. I have resources. Matteo set his cup down. What I lacked was purpose. You gave me that. Sophia felt a flush of warmth that had nothing to do with the spring sunshine. Over these months, something had shifted between them. A slow, careful movement from tentative allies to friends to something deeper neither had yet named. It wasn't just me, she said. It was Leo, the girls, seeing what was possible when you stopped hiding from life. Matteo nodded, acknowledging the truth in her words. I was existing, not living. After Elena died, after losing our baby, I convinced myself that was all I deserved, all I could expect. And now, his eyes met hers, clear and steady. Now I know better. From inside the house came the sound of a baby crying, then Leo's voice as he tried to soothe his niece. Sophia started to rise, but Matteo touched her arm. I'll go, he said. Finish your coffee. She watched him walk into the house, heard his gentle voice as he spoke to the baby, Luisa, from the sound of the cry. A year ago, she had been homeless, desperate, convinced that the world had abandoned her and her family. Now she sat in a garden, employed, respected, her children healthy, her brother thriving, and a man who had once seemed as remote as the moon was inside, caring for her daughter with a tenderness that still sometimes caught her by surprise. Life had not been kind to either of them. Sophia had lost her parents, faced poverty, known the terror of not being able to feed her children. Matteo had lost his wife and unborn child, locked himself away in grief, forgotten how to connect with others. They had both been broken in different ways. Yet here they were, piecing together something new from the fragments of their past lives. Not perfect, not without complications, but real and alive and growing. When Matteo returned to the patio, he wasn't alone. Leo walked beside him, holding Luisa, while Matteo carried Maria and Anna, one in each arm. The sight made Sophia's heart catch. This unlikely family they were building together, step by careful step. They all woke up, Leo explained, settling beside Sophia with Luisa on his lap. I think they knew we were talking about them. Were we? Matteo asked, smiling as he sat down, the other two babies immediately trying to crawl from his lap to explore. In a way, Sophia said. We were talking about family, about building something that lasts. Leo looked between them, his young face suddenly serious. Are we a family now? You and Matteo, and me and the babies? The question hung in the air, simple yet profound. Sophia met Matteo's eyes over the children's heads, saw the same question reflected there, the same hope. I think we're becoming one, she said finally. Families come in all kinds of shapes. Ours is just, uniquely our own. Matteo reached across the space between them, his hand finding hers. Is that something you want, Sophia? Because I've learned not to assume I know what's best for anyone else. Sophia thought about the long journey that had brought them here, from the corner of an abandoned market to this peaceful garden. From strangers to reluctant allies to whatever they were becoming now. It hadn't been easy. It wouldn't always be easy going forward. But there was something solid here, something worth building on. Yes, she said simply. It is. Leo, satisfied with this answer, returned his attention to Luisa, who was attempting to grab his glasses. The babies continued their determined exploration of the patio, stopping occasionally to pull themselves up on chairs or crawl back to Matteo or Sophia for reassurance before venturing out again. They didn't need grand declarations or formal arrangements. What they had built was both simpler and more profound, a daily commitment to showing up, to caring, to creating security where once there had been only uncertainty. Maria toddled over to Sophia, pulling herself up on her mother's knees. Those remarkable hazel green eyes, so like Matteo's late wife's, looked up at her with complete trust. Sophia lifted her daughter into her lap, feeling the solid weight of her, the miracle of her existence. I think, Matteo said quietly, watching them, that Elena would be glad about this. That the egg you donated, meant to give us a child, eventually did, just in a way none of us could have imagined. Sophia nodded, understanding what he meant. There was symmetry here, a closing of a circle neither of them had known they were drawing. Not fate, exactly, but a kind of redemption. A second chance that honored what came before without being defined by it. As the afternoon light softened around them, Sophia looked at the family they had created, not through traditional bonds of marriage or shared history, but through choice, through persistence, through refusing to let past wounds determine future possibilities. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't always easy. But it was theirs, and it was real, and for today, that was enough.